manager of news operations. Are they worth it? The Olympics set to return to Paris, perhaps for the first time in a century, when the International Olympic Committee in September ratifies the decision to award the Games to both the French capital and Los Angeles. One city will get the 2024 Games if all goes to script, the other the 2028 Games. Why cut short the bidding for the next Olympics? Why only 2 finalists? Where did the Hamburgs, Bostons, Budapests, and Romes of this world go? Well, they dropped out long before the finish line, sometimes pushed out by their own citizens in referendums against their candidacies. It's not so much for a lack of Olympic spirit, but more worry about the costs. Just ask residents of Rio. The hosts of the most recent Games Monday saw their request rejected for a $35 to $40 million handout from the IOC to cover a deficit compounded by a crippling recession in Brazil. Well, read the fine print, you might say. The IOC is under no obligation to pay more money to Rio. So where does the governing body's money go? Is there a disconnect between the values it preaches and what it practices? And how should the Olympics be run? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the bidding process for the upcoming Games. With us, he won Olympic gold in fencing in Sydney and in Athens. Brice Guillard, member of the Athletes Committee for the Paris 2024 bid. Thank you for being with us.
Hello, my pleasure.
From Lausanne, Stratus Safoliers, Public Relations Advisor for the aborted Rome 2024 bid, and who worked on the successful campaigns for London 2012 and the upcoming 2018 Winter Games in Pyeongchang in South Korea. Thank you for joining us. From Northampton, Massachusetts, Andrew Zimbalist is Professor of Economics at Smith College. Your new book is out in hardcover, No Boston Olympics, How and Why Smart Cities Are Passing on the Torch. Thank you for being with us.
Good to be with you.
And Andreas Evagora, Managing Director of News at Eurosport. Welcome back to the show, sir.
Evening.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. After the oral exam, Paris, the bookmakers' favorites to go first. That means to get the 2024 Games. But it'll be down to the delegates in Lima, Peru on September 13th. If so, it'll be 4th time lucky for a candidacy by the French capital. Laurent Berstecker has more.
Determined to succeed where his predecessors failed, a beaming Emmanuel Macron seemed confident of Paris's chances to host its first Olympic Games in 100 years.
You're right to remember that we lost 3 times, so we don't want to lose a 4th one. And I decided from the very beginning of my mandate to back this project and to give the maximum in order to promote this candidature.
Both the Los Angeles and the Paris teams were in Lausanne on Tuesday to give fresh presentations to the IOC. While Emmanuel Macron has been directly involved in the French bid, U.S. President Donald Trump continued to keep a low profile, only expressing support in a single tweet. Yet the American side seemed optimistic that it could beat Paris to the punch.
We can help redefine sustainability because we don't have to build a single permanent new venue, not even an Olympic village or a media village. We can help redefine Olympic legacy because we have 4 sports parks all around LA harnessing our existing venues for the entire city.
Only Paris and LA are left in the running after 7 cities, including Rome, Boston, and Budapest, canceled their bids, citing high costs and sustainability reasons. Eager to keep the remaining candidates happy, the IOC said Tuesday Paris and LA will be guaranteed to host either the 2024 or the 2028 Games, as long as both agree to stay in the race.
Brice Guillard, let's first talk about Paris's bid. The final decision will be made in September in Lima, Peru. The IOC's language is that they want some kind of an agreement between Paris and LA over who gets the bid first. But if there's no agreement, that the 2 sides pledge to take the game 4 years later. What do you think of the deal?
It's a new deal. And it's normal because, in fact, it's really 2 great candidatures. LA and Paris are strong, and that's why they are in final, and that's why they still here, because they fit with the new rules of the Olympics. New rules determined by the schedule 2020, with 20 plus 20, 40 new rules to make the grade more durable, and that's the first candidature in this context. So that's why some other city like Rome or Hamburg maybe quit, because they were not as strong as Paris and LA. So now, okay, it's a new deal, negotiation. So still in fight.
All right, we'll get back to the reasons of why Paris and LA are still in it and not the others. Andres Evagora, what did you think when you first heard about this deal? Well, to basically scrap the bidding for 2028 and give it to both Paris and LA.
Not too surprising, because these are the games that no one or very few people wanted to host for the reasons you're saying, the rising costs and the controversy involved in hosting Olympic Games. Remember, both of these cities have said they want 2024, and if you look at Paris, their sponsorship deals are locked into 2024. The Athletes' Village is in an area where there's going to be no construction till 2024. So there's still a lot of work to be done. And to answer your question about 2028, now it's a question of concessions, because whoever gets 2028 will be asking for a lot of concessions, i.e. money from the IOC.
Yeah, Brisquiard, because when there was Paris's bid for the 2012 Games, there was in the west of Paris an area that was allocated for an Olympic Village. Of course, London got those games, so that instead became housing developments. Now, okay, they found another place north of Paris to have an Olympic Village.
It's still close to Paris.
But what happens if they say to you, oh, it's going to be 2028, not 2024? Will you still be able to have that Olympic Village? How far will it set back your candidacy?
I don't know. I think it will be difficult to maintain this location, because the 93 department needs some habitations.
This is the area just north of Paris.
80,000 per year. This department needs of new apartments. So we can't maintain this area like this. So it has to be in 2024.
Has to be in 2024. Yeah. All right. Paris can't wait around, especially when it comes to that all that land that was earmarked for an Olympic Village. Andrew Zimbalist, your thoughts on the way this process has unfolded, with so many cities, including Boston, dropping out of the process along the way. Did you think it would come down to this?
It was hard to predict that Budapest and Rome and Hamburg would all drop out. In terms of Boston, Boston actually didn't drop out. The USOC pulled it out because it was losing support and because its plans weren't viable. You know, at this point in time, one of your earlier speakers said that this is the first candidature under Agenda 2020. That's not true. There was a candidature for the 2022 Winter Olympics also under that. And he said that both Paris and LA fit Agenda 2020. Well, maybe they do, but this is a very loosely defined propaganda tool of the IOC. If you really wanted to stick to the 40 recommendations of Agenda 2020, what you do is you'd pick LA, because LA is a much less expensive bid, much less expensive, and because it doesn't have to build anything, it also promotes sustainability better than Paris does. Paris, however, has the symbolic advantage of going back to 1924. Was the last time that any city in France hosted the Olympic Games 100 years earlier. They have the advantage of politics. People, I think there's a great deal of sympathy for the terrorist incidents that Paris has experienced over the last several years. There's a great deal of international, I think, distaste for Donald Trump, and a great deal of love at this point for Macron. So Paris, and Paris, as was mentioned earlier, Paris has missed, they've lost out on 3 recent bids, and LA hasn't. So Paris is really a very, very heavy favorite here. And LA has both the advantage and the disadvantage of not having to build anything. Because it doesn't have to build anything permanent, they can't very well make the argument that Paris is making about Saint-Denis, they can't say, well, if you don't give it to us in 2024, we won't be able to do it in 2028, because they're ready to do it. They could do it today, or not today, but next year, if the IOC wanted them to. This notion that Paris and LA either come to an accord or it gets thrown open to September, I think it's pretty clear what's going to happen here. LA and Paris will not come to an agreement. There'll be a vote in Lima on September 13th that gives it to Paris. LA will have the opportunity to take it in 28, but Mayor Garcetti in Los Angeles has made it pretty clear that he wants to see some concessions from the IOC. And indeed, the economic model of the IOC is one that's going to have to change. So, you know, the IOC is generating $4.5 billion in television and sponsorship and licensing revenues for every Summer Olympic Games, and they're giving the hosts $1.5 billion. Why should that be the case? And so Mayor Garcetti will want to have some concessions, some subsidies coming to Los Angeles if they're going to agree to the 28 rather than the 24 hosting.
All right, let me bring in Stratos Safialis on this. Do you see the IOC granting those concessions to Los Angeles if the scenario unfolds the way Andrew describes it?
I think all parties are mature enough to understand that they need to come to an agreement. The conventional wisdom here in Lausanne Swiss Tech Center is that the 2024 Games will go to Paris for some of the reasons that your previous speaker said.
Yeah, the fact that, let me ask you about that, the fact that Emmanuel Macron is there, but Donald Trump just sends a tweet. How did that go down?
It sent. I'm a little partisan on that because I'm not a big fan of Donald Trump. I'm a big fan of Mayor Garcetti. But Trump's tweet brought laughter rather than anything else. I'm sorry, because it showed that there's a token support without a lot of thought, as opposed to Mayor Garcetti's thoughtful approach. But let me tell you this: the appearance of President Macron here was a catalyst. It's not just that. Most of the people look upon Macron as someone who brings hope. They just saw it with their own eyes, listened with their own ears. President Macron didn't just stay in let's say, in the usual talk about the power of sports, but he went further on and spoke about the big ideas, bringing society together, giving hope, bringing the Olympic values. And it comes from someone that has amidst this hope, this confidence. And I think this is something that is desperately needed now, not just by the Olympic movement, but I guess by Europe and democracy around the world. So I can tell you unequivocally that the presence of President Macron here makes a tremendous impression. I think I would dare say that it's almost impossible to deny Paris the 2024 Games.
All right, the biggest fear when it comes to Paris is security after the terror attacks we saw. On that score, the French president points to last year's Euro 2016 football championships.
Of course.
For Euro 2016, we had 1 million people in the Paris fan zone, 3 million people in fan zones across France. No incident, because we had 90,000 policemen deployed throughout the country and a certain knowledge and know-how, which means there wasn't any anxiety.
Il est au rendez-vous. C'est ce qui fait qu'il n'y avait pas d'angoisse.
All right, Brice Guillard, there's a bit of Macron mania, it seems. But let me ask you, because French people remember that failed bid for 2012. What did Paris do differently this time?
Yes, for me it's not a Macron show. Macron knows very well the subject because he was at the Ministry of Economics when we built the candidature. The difference is that it's not one politic guy who is supporting the candidature. There is a team between, and for the first time, the French sport movements are in the first place to build this project, and it's more an alignment between the politics. The Olympic French movement, Paris, the Île-de-France region, and other private or institutional
coalition.
Yes, and that's the first time the signal is really clear.
It's about lobbying, isn't it? Getting the Olympics. And in 2012, the British beat the French.
Well, Britain sent out David Beckham, who at the time was probably the second biggest man in football. The biggest man in football was Zidane, and the French didn't send him because he was from Marseille. He wasn't from Paris, as if people outside of France care. So that's a perfect example. And the French have got their act together, absolutely. But you can't get away from the fact that in 2012, when we were talking about that in 2005, there was a great bid from Moscow. There was a good bid from Madrid. There was a great bid from New York City. Back in 2005, the big cities of the world really wanted to host the Olympics. Now we're left with two. They are very good candidates, but they have huge challenges ahead, not least keeping the Olympic Games relevant to a younger audience around the world, because between now and 2024, it's a huge battle. Younger people are starting to switch off the Olympics. The TV ratings from NBC, for example, were disastrous for Rio. That's public information, even though compared to London, the time zone was much more favourable. They were down 10%. So there's a big job for Paris and LA in 2028 to keep the games relevant for young people and to keep the interest up.
Stratos Safalialis, you agree?
Yes, I mean, President Macron made this argument very clearly. He was asked exactly that. Is there, with all the issues around the Olympic Games, why is it worth it? And he said, it's exactly the reason I'm here. I'm here to challenge the previous status quo. I'm here to bring the games to Paris because I think it will help us out in all the social issues and the social programs, and also bring the big ideas. When you're talking about the Olympics, you have to remember this is not just another mega event. If you really want to talk about the Olympics, you have to talk about understanding, you have to talk about tolerance, you have to talk about the fight against racism, which means also the fight against terrorism. You need a leader who will take this mantle and take it forward and remind the world what Olympics is all about.
All right, when we come back, we'll pick up on that point. And how do you perk the interest of younger generations in the Olympic movement? Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're speaking on the day when the International Olympic Committee agreed to the principle of concomitant Olympics to Los Angeles and Paris. In which order, we'll find out in September. Paris the favorites for 2024, and LA for 2028. Not a done deal yet, but we had the big oral exams of both of those bids take place on the banks of Lake Geneva over the past 2 days. With us to talk about it, Brice Guillard, member of the Athletes Committee on the Paris 2024 bid, who won gold in the foil in the fencing at the games in Sydney and in Athens as well. Stratos Safalialis is in Lausanne, public relations advisor for the aborted Rome 2024 games, but who also worked on the successful campaigns for London 2012 and Pyeongchang, the upcoming 2018 Winter Games. With us from Northampton, Massachusetts, Andrew Zimbalist, professor of economics at Smith College. Your latest book, No Boston Olympics, How and Why Smart Cities Are Passing on the Torch. And Andreas Evagora, manager of news operations at Eurosport Partner Station, located just across the street, their headquarters. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate. The last time Paris hosted the Games, the year was 1924. Games remembered for Johnny Weissmuller's gold in swimming and water polo. He'd go on to play Tarzan in Hollywood, Pavel Numi of Finland in athletics, and of course this. Of course, that's not footage from the exploits of Britain's Harold Abrahams, who'd win gold in the 100-meter dash, employing horror of horrors, a professional coach. Andrew Zimbalist, when you think back to the 1924 Games, what are your thoughts on where the Olympics have come?
They've gotten much more grandiose, much more expensive. Let's go back just a little bit further. 1896 is the beginning of the modern Olympics. The games there were in Athens. At that point in time, we didn't have international jet travel. We didn't have international radio or television. Indeed, we didn't have radio or television at all. And if you're going to build something as an international movement, it was necessary to move it from one venue to the other so people in different parts of the world could both participate and observe it. In our world today, where we have international internet, we have international television, we have international jet travel, and we have an ability to communicate with each other around the world, across the globe, it's not really necessary to move the games around every 4 years. But that still is the business model of the IOC. It's a business model that's been breaking down lately, but the fundamental model is that you get the cities of the world to bid against each other and bid up the price. And the IOC has every 4 years until Agenda 2020 has wanted more and more. They've wanted more venues. There have been more sports that have been part of it. They have more and more demands for luxury. And the prices have gone higher and higher for the venues and for the infrastructure because the cities have been competing against each other and willing to pay. Now, it finally got to a point where cities are spending $15 or $20 billion on the expenditure side. They're bringing in $3 or $4 billion on the revenue side. So you have a $14, $15, $20 billion deficit, depending on the case. And cities are wising up and saying, well, wait a minute, this isn't working out for me. And the notion that all of a sudden tourists are going to come pouring into my city, or we're going to get more foreign investment and more foreign trade, that hasn't been borne out empirically. So the business model is breaking down, which is why that we have the concomitant awards now, because the IOC can't afford to go into the bidding for 2028, and that'll be decided in the year 2021. They can't afford to go into that bidding and have one or two cities, or maybe no cities, willing to bid. So they have two excellent bids out there. They want to lock them in, and that's what's happening today.
Briskia, your thoughts on this? Because obviously when you arrive in Sydney to take part in the Olympics, you travel literally across the globe for this, fencing since you're a child. And this idea that perhaps, it's just gotten too big and too grandiose, and maybe sometime in the future, the Olympics should always be held in one place.
Don't know about this idea. The great thing I remember is when I travel as an athlete, as a sportler, I will meet other cultures, other people. I met in Sydney some people who were totally engaged as a benevolent during the games, volunteers during the games, and each time it's a new experience. It's a new way to share. So that's because I'm an athlete and I'm a sporter, and I want to share with the people.
The point that was made by Andreas at the end of part one of our discussion about how do you keep the interest of the younger generations for the Olympics? Because the beauty of the Olympics is a sport like yours doesn't get much TV airtime usually, right? Fencing is not something you see in prime time.
Yeah.
How do you perk their interest? How do you get the next generation to enjoy those sports?
Our vision with Paris 2024 is to engage the young people in building the Olympics, and I'm pretty sure that the young people will participate as volunteers, will create their own startup to be part of the games and of the Olympics. And I think it's a good project to mobilize this kind of population to be part and to build this project. So as a young, and now I'm as a former Olympian, I want to build this project. So it's an answer.
Well, first of all, I think Andrew's absolutely right about the spiraling costs. And even though the IOC is this huge tanker, there has been a change because of Sochi. I mean, Sochi was $50 billion in investment in a subtropical part of Russia. And I think most people around the world thought this is getting out of hand for 2 weeks of winter sports. So slowly the IOC's expectations have gone down. But going back to your question, how does a country measure whether an Olympics is successful? I mean, I'll talk about my own home country. London 2012 was fantastically successful in terms of elite athletes. Britain was brilliant in Rio, third in the medals table, exceeding all expectations. But participation in sport in England, because Sport England put out a report recently, has gone down since 2012. So you really have to define how do you decide whether an Olympics is successful or not. If you want a bag full of gold medals, maybe London is an example. If you want more participation, it isn't. And another key aspect is this legacy, because even though Paris is only going to spend 6 billion, that's still a lot of money. That's about the same amount that France spent recently for a TGV to go from Paris to Bordeaux. That shows that's a lot of money.
Stratos Afildialos.
But let's say something. Yes, let's say something. I mean, it's easy to criticize the Olympics, and a lot of it's legitimate. I think it's wrong to blame the Olympics for everything that's wrong in the governance of a certain country. And it's also necessary to dispel some of the myths, because it's, like I said, it's easy to be against it. For example, Athens has gone down in history, at least as you read in the international press, as a failure. And I'm here to tell you, and I'm not saying this because I'm from Greece, I'm a professional in this business, I can tell you this was a tremendous success. So people will think, wait a minute, what about these empty venues? But if we examine this a little better, we got a new airport, we got a new metro system, we got suburban rail, we got a ring road around Athens, we got a revamp in our energy system, we got a revamp of the telecommunication system, and by the way, the main stadium was used from day one. But this is not a story that's been told easily. I'm in the media business. I don't mind. I understand it's easier to show the empty, baseball area. It's sexier, but we need to be a little more truthful about this. So there is a transformative power for the Olympic Games if done properly. And also, if I may add, again, this sounds very much self-serving because a lot of my business comes from bidding. But I have to tell you this. The bidding business also leaves a legacy if done properly. The Olympic Games is a huge megaphone. It allows for a country to tell a story to the world. And this goes into the economic benefits, but also it goes in something which is much larger. It's about its narrative. So different countries find bidding useful for different reasons. So
Stratos, what do you say to Rio right now when they ask for $35 to $40 million worth of help in plugging their deficit after the games?
Listen, I cannot be arrogant about this, and I don't know enough, but I will say this, generally speaking. You cannot blame the Olympic Games for bad governance. I'm not making any suggestions, but I'll give you an example. I went to Rio, I was there. The people of Brazil tried very hard. It wasn't easy. It's a beautiful city. They went through the World Cup and through the Olympic Games. Can someone explain to me why still the water is it's so polluted, and why they missed two opportunities for two big events to get the place so much better and so much easier to live for the people of the city? Is that something that we need to blame the Olympic Games, which could have been a catalyst, or was it something different? I mean, I can tell you from just moving back to Athens, which is something that I'm more familiar. So many, even in Greece, would say, well, look at what happened to Greece. It got bankrupt. I mean, and it was a complete disaster. And why is this argument out there? Because it's easier to blame the Olympic Games than assume responsibility in the political system. We need to be fair when we make this assessment. And I take, some of the arguments against the way the Olympics were done in the past are completely valid. And I think the IOC has come to understand this, and they're scaling down the games. There are not so many demands to build permanent structures. They put a lot of effort into sustainability because that's the way the world is going. So this is the only way forward. And I think as we approach a new thinking, the Olympic Games will again become a power to transform cities and to promote ideals. I'm a believer.
Andrew Zimbalist, let me ask you about what happened with Boston.
Can I respond to that?
Go ahead.
Let me respond to that. Can I respond to that? Look, first of all, there's nobody who's blaming the Olympics for the polluted water in Guanabara Bay. Nobody is doing that. The problem isn't that the Olympics created these social and economic catastrophes in Rio. The problem is that when you spend $20 billion to host the Olympics, it's $20 billion that you don't have to spend to clean up Guanabara. And the Olympics makes you create a new golf course in an environmentally protected area. That's a direct problem that's created by the Olympics.
But you also heard
In terms
Stratos
of
say
Athens,
that
look,
the Olympics acted as a catalyst
spent
for building, for instance, the infrastructure in Athens.
Look, if any city requires to host the Olympics in order to build infrastructure, they better do something with their political system. The money that was spent on the airport in Athens, the money that was spent on the roads in Athens, the money that was spent on other infrastructure in Athens could have been spent if they didn't host the Olympics. The Olympics put on Athens and Greece a whole other set of financial burdens that made it difficult to do other things to promote development. You don't want the Olympics to be blamed for bad things. Don't say that the Olympics has caused the good things. What caused the infrastructure is that the city spent money.
With all due respect, I would say this again. Going back to Athens, there was a study by the Chamber of Industry that examined the money that was spent in Greece, which depends. Some say it's 8 billion, some say 10 billion, and they tried to figure out whether we lost or we won out of this. And the result of this study, which is public, by the way, and it's not commissioned by the IOC or anybody else, it's by the industry. Of the Union of Industries in Greece commissioned the study, and the result is the following: because of the investment that was put together in 2003 and 2004, the influx of tourists in Greece was so immense that technically 10 years later, when the study was released, the Olympic Games paid for itself, and this is not accounting all the other benefits. Again, I mean, in every aspect of
they could have built
public
infrastructure
life,
without hosting the games.
It could, but it didn't. I was a young kid and I heard about the metro. I grew up listening to stories about the new metro system, and it never happened. And all of a sudden it happened in 2000. Now, we can debate whether there are other reasons that could perhaps put the resources together, but the fact of the matter is that if done properly, and this is something that rests upon the political system and civil society to put pressure on the IOC and also the political system to do this properly. There's something very important that can be achieved through the Olympic Games. And again, I mean, I can be cynical about numbers and this and that, but I will suggest the following, and this is not unimportant. I would suggest that any of you, if you have the chance, go inside the opening ceremony and watch the athletes parade, which, by the way, on TV looks very boring. That's what I thought, until my first one. When you realize that there's thousands of people go inside, and all of a sudden you find one common place where you can find Israelis and Iraqis together and Iranians together. And at a time like this, let's not discount the important values that come with the Olympic Games. I think when you put all these packets together,
Stratos, we only know.
I think it's
to me, we know one side of the equation.
It's not an easy one.
We know one side of the equation.
An easy one. I'm not saying.
We know how much is spent, but we don't truly know how much is brought in. Let's be honest. We know how much is spent. And I've been to Athens, and the infrastructure improvement is wonderful. But we don't really know whether a tourist has gone to Athens or Beijing or London because of the Olympic Games. So I agree with you completely. We mustn't blame the IOC for everything.
What the study says.
But we know how studies can work. I'll give you another example of where I'm from. Britain, London spent, 700 million on the Olympic Stadium, and it's now rented out at 2 million per game. Now, that's a great deal for West Ham United, who are the football club who rent it out, but it's not a very good deal for the investment in that part of the world. Nevertheless, there's a new park in East London, and some people say it's great. So I think you can measure how much is spent, but I think it's a dangerous game when you try and measure and say, well, we've gained this number of euros or lost this number of euros. Because I agree with you, it's how do you put a tangible figure on the fact that there's a fantastic metro in Athens? You can't really.
All right, part one of our discussion, we heard from the French president.
I can tell you that 500,000 of people are using it per day. I mean, he's literally, for Athens, where I spend most of my time when I don't travel abroad, so half of my time is in Athens, it has changed the quality of life of 4 million people living in Athens. This is not just an idea or a notion or something intangible. This is something very tangible. But trust me, when you Google up Athens 2004, you will find only catastrophe stories. I mean,
all right, let's just talk because we're running short.
I don't blame anyone for this.
We're running a little bit short on time, Stratos. Just wanted one more point to broach on, and we started to talk about it a little while ago with Brice Guillard when you described that Olympic spirit he felt the first time that he showed up in Sydney. Los Angeles, which last hosted the Games in 1984, talking up the city's embrace of the Olympic spirit as it presented its bid.
We believe in the Olympic movement, that we're ready, and especially that we believe that the power of sport can change the world.
We are in love with the Olympics because I think we see that legacy every single day in Olympic rings on our pools and Olympic rings that are in our communities. Just look at Wimbledon right now. Venus Williams, who with her sister played in a LA 84 funded tennis program and became two of the greatest ever.
And I want to rebound off something you said, Andreas, about how people watch the Olympics, but are more of them participating in sports? Brice Guillard, what has the Olympics done for fencing?
Great visibility. And after each Olympics, it's about, we are in France, we are maybe 60,000 fencers, and after each Olympic, it's more than 10,000 fencers in the club.
Every 4 years, you feel a bump of people who.
Yes, it's difficult to maintain this young sportler in fencing during the 4 years, but it has an impact, and also it's a good way to talk about sport in the company, and for in education, and then for health, because we know that with the sport we can diminish the cost of the sécurité sociale in France. So
the healthcare system.
Yeah. So it's a good opportunity during 7 years to bring people to sport and to share with them the values and what it brings. For the young people in their studies, I think in London there was a program Get Set with more than 6 million of young students, and it shows that they work better together, and because of the sport, because of this program, and I think it's a good way to prepare young people to work, because when you work, you have to get some interaction, and maybe sports and collective sports can bring you this way to work and to interact with the others.
All right, so much more to talk about. Let's all come back in September, and when there's that big IOC meeting in Lima. I want to thank you, Brice Guillard. I want to thank Stratos Safolielos for being with us from Lausanne, where that big oral exam took place for Paris and London. Andrew Zimbalist in Northampton, Massachusetts, and Andreas Evagora. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. Stay seated just... And we say hello to Emma James.
Hi there.
There's a lot of negativity out there. Is it directed against the IOC? What is it about?
It is directed at pretty much everything. In fact, the only place you will find positive messages is actually from the team involved in making this Paris bid happen. Emmanuel Macron obviously tweeting from Lausanne. This image, of course, with Tony Estanguet, the 3 times gold Olympic medalist, very much in the foreground. Emmanuel Macron there prepared to take a back seat, which is quite interesting. He says, we're ready to celebrate sport, culture and Olympic values, ready to share. But is the rest of the world? Well, Paris 2024, the official account for it has been tweeting this kind of thing. If you remember, just a couple of weeks ago, we had the International Olympic Day. And these were the images in Paris showing what France's capital city can look like when it gets given the chance. However, if I can make my mouse behave, when you look elsewhere, you get messages like this from cartoonist Na, saying, yeah, for sure, it's really going to change my life, says a man sitting in traffic. Because,
by the way, it's a similar gripe I heard from people in Los Angeles, worried about...
Absolutely, because there will be an impact on people's everyday lives. If you live in Paris and the Olympics are in Paris, it is going to affect you without question. And the interesting thing is that whenever Olympics happen, then generally people get very, very excited and become real armchair sports fans. But right at the moment, that seems to be lacking. Again, this from the Paris 2024 official account. They put this video online asking people to share their favourite word to describe Paris. But if we scroll down to the reactions, nobody's giving their favourite words. They are talking about this project will cost too much, this isn't very representative. And people are really genuinely quite upset about this.
Andreas Evagor, we didn't have a referendum like in Hamburg where they voted down the bid. I'm not getting the sense of an anti-Paris mood in Paris.
Well, the last opinion poll I saw was about 66% for, but that's Parisians, that's not French people, so perhaps make the distinction between those two sets of populations.
Yes, because it does make a difference. When it impacts on your own life, then you do tend to view these things quite differently. But just a taste of some of the other tweets out there. This person saying, really happy that my taxes are going to be financing an 11-metre diving pool and a track for 3,000-metre steeple race. I don't think that one's
it's
serious.
10 metre, not 11.
Well, we'll let him know. This gentleman as well saying, am I alone in not wanting Paris 2024? Well, clearly not from what I've looked at today. He says, we have a lot more to lose, us, the citizens, and it's basically the state that will gain, according to him. And this one as well saying that, you promise us that it won't cost anything, but they've attached this image from Le Monde where they've looked at the estimates for what Olympic Games will cost as opposed to the reality in orange. I mean, in Beijing, it was ridiculous. 2.6 was the estimate. 32 billion euros was the eventual cost. And this is an interesting article, too, from the Los Angeles Times. Of course, LA, the other successful bidder today. They were looking not so long ago at the current situation in Tokyo, where the 2020 Games, the budget there was supposed to be, according to Japanese officials, less than $7 billion. But they say even with significant reductions, the current estimate tops $12 billion. Now, the LA bid is described as low cost because they were they plan to do it. They say they'll do it with a cost of $5.3 billion. That's 4.6 billion euros, whereas Paris would cost more at 6.2, although according to the feasibility study that was done back in 2015, the costs should be kept low because they are going to use a lot of existing structures. So it's only really the athletes' village which is going to cost a lot of money to construct, and an Olympic swimming pool as well. And the issue of cost really does seem to be concerning a lot of people. This article in the Washington Post, I think, is particularly interesting, talking about basically the bidding process is backwards. She says it's the IOC who should be begging capital cities to actually host the Olympic Games. She accuses them of epic waste and says that cities should demand a larger cut of TV and sponsorship money to offset the cost of putting on the Games.
All right, Emma James, we'll again be talking about it in September when we get the final decision. I want to thank you. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.